Good morning from Israel. We have some things to think about and talk about today. And I thought maybe the best thing is not to go into the detail of every single law that was passed,
Yeah.
but to just give an overview of what these laws mean to the people and how it played out in their lives as a nation and for us as individuals.
Why it's good for the people too.
Well, it says that it's our life.
Mm-hmm.
You get life from choosing to do the teachings of God.
Because people that make the wrong decisions in life are destroying themselves, really.
Every negative will affect us negatively. The negative things that come to us, we have to learn how to respond positively. It takes knowing God's word to help us through those times.
Mm-hmm.
And when we react to people negatively, then it impacts us negatively. So that's really the basis of a lot of these laws, and it tells how you're to relate to each other and what to do with people who murder. And it was the there's a lot of noise out there, isn't there?
I'll talk about it.
So the idea is when they sin, like the golden calf, they get more rules. Every time they sin, they got more rules.
That's why Americans have so many rules.
That's right. The only way that those rules don't apply is when we walk in a positive way with God and keep our relationship so that we know Him, what He wants from us, and we sense His presence.
Because Adam didn't have very many rules.
No, he only had a few. The stuff in the air is making my nose tickle. So anyway, we will see how this affects them as a nation. We can take that and look at it and say, oh, that also affects us as on an individual level if we do these same things. So they have made a covenant with God to make Him their God and King. Now, how is that related to, like, say, America? We built our Constitution under God.
Mm-hmm.
So that means we want to be related to Him.
Yeah.
A lot of constitutions have good things that are democratic, and they have the 10 laws, but they don't necessarily relate to being under God. Well, these people coming out of Egypt were supposed, everybody had a God in those days, okay?
Yeah.
And so they were getting acquainted with how their God was different than all the other gods, and they were making God king.
Yeah.
Now, they weren't a nation as such out in the desert because they didn't have land.
That's right. No boundaries, no land.
No boundaries. And nations aren't nations until they have land and boundaries.
In fact, they had trouble when they tried to pass through other nations.
Right. So God was, they were in the process of making God king.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he did make some rules about a king.
Mm-hmm.
He said, someday you will want a king, or you can have a king.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the rules for that king. But it was never to supersede him.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to deal with how they replaced God with the king, because they weren't really mature enough in their faith with God to make God king and have a king under him.
Yeah, we see that in the book of Judges, especially they didn't have
everybody did what was right in their own eyes.
Yeah.
So then it gets so bad that they want somebody to rule them like Moses, and that insults Samuel, who thinks he's doing the right job and the good job. And so what I take from that incident, and maybe we should just take that as a thing right now, but there's other things to talk about before they get there. But um, they had not learned how to walk with God in faith. They were just like little kids learning to have faith in God, or maybe teenagers. Sometimes we have more faith as a child, and then we get confronted with the things that are in life, and we sort of forget what that having faith in God is like.
Well, if everybody's doing their own thing, they're no longer really following what God wants.
That's true. So God gives into them, and he says, okay, you can have a king. But it wasn't the right time for them to have a king.
No.
We see in God's dealings with Israel that when he gives us free will, we have free will.
Yeah, he lets us make decisions.
And he figures that we learn by our mistakes. And that's what we're in the process of doing. So they get the king, but the king doesn't turn out to be much better than what they had. And they have some problems with the first pick, which is what God picked someone that was tall, handsome,
Yeah.
and they could look up to him. They could see him everywhere.
Yeah.
And this would be similar to Moses being known. Everybody knew who Moses was, and he always had the glory of God shining on him. So in some ways, because of their status, God gave them a king that had physical characteristics that looked kingly. But that's not the ideal.
It has to be more than that.
Yeah, and so what happens is Saul then, he's thinking he's not following the instructions of God. He's thinking more like, well, this is my logic about this, and he chooses to do differently than, and he justifies what he does as though he had done the right thing. And that's what a lot of us do. We justify our decisions, and we are deceiving ourselves because we don't go back to, why do I really want it this way and not the way God told me? And so we cover up by saying, well, I'll keep out some of the best sheep and sacrifice them to God. But God didn't tell them to do that. He didn't say he wanted to sacrifice out of that. So they were dealing with the Amalekites. The Amalekites picked them off when they were coming through the wilderness.
Yeah.
And God didn't want them to give them room for anything.
That's right.
Because of their attitude. So Saul apparently didn't understand that.
Oh, yeah, or yeah.
But he just chose to do things a little differently, than not down to the very thing that God had asked him to do.
He didn't complete what God wanted.
Yeah. No, and then they let the king live.
Yeah.
So that's related to the book of Esther, and we'll get to that maybe later, how they're still paying for the wrong choice that he made. And so that's what the teachings of God and the laws of God are all about, is learning how to trust God that when he says something, that's the best thing for you. And it's the best thing for the nation. And we have to keep our focus on the instruction. Does that remind you of that book that Lewis wrote? The three kids that are in Narnia, and they're supposed to go
C.S. Lewis. Oh yeah.
Rescue this guy, but there's five instructions.
Yeah.
And when they're talking to God, it's all so clear. And they're told, well, it's going to get difficult. And so then as time goes by, they finally see some of the signposts, but it gets more difficult. They become a little more confused the further they go and further. And this is sort of the way it was for Israel, because once we start justifying our actions, then that puts a fog over the signposts and the way that we're supposed to walk. And so
but now we have people who are under a government that's not what God really wants entirely. And also, people are going to be asking, well, how can I understand these laws? How do I know what they really mean for me, and so forth.
you mean in present day?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. It's hard to say just exactly where the nation is spiritually,
Mm-hmm.
because there's a lot of secular people who don't know how to handle the religious part of it.
You mean
But they,
here?
yeah, but they still say they believe in God.
But even those outside of Israel are wanting to have the right kind of rules, for their life.
Yeah, that's true. But uh, the the religious part kind of creates a fog. I'll tell you why I think this.
Okay.
When they came back from Babylon under Ezra and Nehemiah, a great assembly of judges was formed.
Right.
Before they went out, Isaiah says that the prophets and priests were not doing the right thing.
Right.
Okay, if the prophets and priests are not 100% right anymore, then the laws they make aren't right either. And you're getting into religion more when you make all these extra laws.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not directing the people into more of a relationship with God.
Yeah.
So what we call Judaism really we don't have Judaism today. At that point, you begin to have rabbinic Judaism.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And you have rabbis that are ordained, and they're making more laws for the communities that they live in. And
Or they interpret the laws a certain way.
well, they do because of their circumstances. And so then this community has a few rules that aren't quite the same as the people over here. And maybe it wasn't so bad when they were the group that had come back, but they never forgot all the Jews that didn't come back, and those are part of the Jews that were in the second diaspora way out in all these nations. So today, we've got piles of laws that were made after the time of Ezra and Nehemiah down through to this day because of the different communities and the desire to keep the people together and focus as Jews. And so it became it became a religious sect.
Yeah.
Before that, there was no word for religion. You were either related to God or you weren't.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I know that God would like to get it back to that, where we're each individually related to Him. How do I know that? Because two prophets say that at some point we won't have to say, "Know the Lord," but He will teach each of us.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that means each person has made God king in their life, and they can hear Him when He speaks to their heart. And so if everyone has God speaking to their heart, there won't be any conflict of ideas among them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that we've covered enough today for that, because there are other things we're going to take up about Israel as a nation.
That'd be good.
And this is what I've said today is more an idea of what we do as individuals as well as a nation.
Well, it'd be nice if people send you some questions or reactions too. It'll help you know what to explain more and so forth.
Yeah, then I would know more how far or into how much of this idea they want to go.
Yeah.
So have a good week, and we'll talk to you later.